The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the small Brooklyn apartment, casting pale gold lines across the hardwood floor. Clara Whitmore sat at the narrow kitchen table, her laptop open, a mug of lukewarm coffee untouched beside her. Outside, New York hummed with its usual indifference. Subway brakes screeching, horns blaring, people rushing past one another with eyes fixed on invisible futures. Inside, Clara read through a manuscript from a debut novelist, marking gentle edits with the same patience she used for everything in her life. Her phone buzzed. Ethan. She didn't look surprised. She rarely did anymore. "Hey," she answered softly. "I'll be late tonight," he said,
everything.
his voice clipped, distracted. "We're meeting a potential investor for Lydia's firm. It could be big." Clara closed her eyes for a brief second. "You said that yesterday," she replied. "Well, this one actually matters." The words stung more than they should
You're
have.
never small.
"Dinner?" she asked quietly. "Don't wait up." The line went dead. Clara stared at the
Didn't know
dark
who you
screen,
were, you were.
then slowly set the phone down. She didn't cry. She hadn't in a long time. 3 years ago, when she had married Ethan Blake in a small ceremony at City Hall, she had believed in something foolish. That love could exist without conditions. That she didn't have to be Clara Whitmore, heiress to a financial empire so vast it was deliberately hidden from public view. She could just be Clara, a woman who edited books, a woman who cooked pasta for her husband, a woman who wanted to be loved for who she was. Ethan had been charming back then, brilliant, hungry for a better life. But hunger, she had learned, could easily turn into contempt. That afternoon, Clara walked through Midtown Manhattan to deliver a contract to a freelance author. Glass skyscrapers reflected her small figure, making her feel like she was dissolving into the city. She passed women in tailored suits, luxury handbags swinging from their wrists. Men in $1,000 shoes talked loudly into Bluetooth headsets. Ethan loved this world. He just didn't love that she didn't belong to it, or at least that she pretended not to. In a mirrored elevator, Clara caught her own reflection. Simple dress, no jewelry except a thin silver band on her finger. No one would ever guess that under a different name, she controlled offshore trusts, global investments, and private equity funds that quietly moved markets. Her father had taught her one rule before he died. Never let anyone love your money before they love you. That night, Ethan didn't come home. Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city breathe. Somewhere across Manhattan, Ethan was with another woman. A woman who looked the part, who fit his ambitions. And in a few days, he would sit across from her at their dining table and slide a set of papers forward. Divorce papers. He would think he was discarding something small. He would have no idea what he was really losing. Ethan Blake had always believed that love was something you earned by becoming more impressive. He grew up in a small Ohio town where his father's failure as a struggling accountant became a quiet shame, one that clung to Ethan like a second skin.
Not every love is meant
From
to
the
stay.
moment he stepped into Harvard Law, he promised himself that he would never be ordinary again. Clara, when he met her, seemed at first like a refuge from that endless striving. She was calm, gentle, uninterested in the performative competition that ruled Manhattan. But over time, that same simplicity began to irritate him, as if her refusal to chase status somehow exposed his own hunger for it. Lydia Carrington appeared in his life like a perfectly tailored answer to all his unspoken resentments. She was the daughter of a powerful investment partner, always dressed in muted luxury, always surrounded by the subtle gravity of money. When she laughed at Ethan's jokes during a networking event, he felt seen in a way he hadn't in months. "You're wasted on mid-level litigation," she told him one evening at a rooftop bar overlooking the Hudson. "Men like you should be shaping the world, not just filing motions." He didn't tell her he was married, or rather, he didn't tell her in a way that mattered. He spoke of Clara as if she were a footnote, a chapter he had already outgrown. Back in Brooklyn, Clara noticed the change, not in dramatic gestures, but in absences. Ethan's jacket no longer carried her faint lavender detergent. His eyes no longer lingered on her when she spoke. When she cooked his favorite pasta, he scrolled through his phone as if she were part of the background noise. One night she asked quietly, "Are you still happy with me?" He looked at her as though the question itself were inconvenient. "You worry too much," he said. We're just in different phases of life. Different phases. The words echoed in her long after he fell asleep. Clara began keeping a private journal again, something she had not done since her father's death. In its pages, she wrote not about money or power, but about loneliness. She wrote about how being unseen hurt more than being unloved. Meanwhile, Ethan's affair with Lydia deepened into something dangerously intoxicating. They met in hotel lounges, in private clubs, in the back seats of town cars. Lydia spoke openly about mergers, offshore accounts, and family wealth, and Ethan listened like a pilgrim before a holy relic. He imagined a future where doors opened for him simply because of who he stood beside.
Everything.
Clara, by contrast, seemed to be shrinking. One evening, after coming home late, Ethan found her sitting in the dark living room, the glow of the city flickering through the window. "We need to talk," she said. He sighed, already tired.
You were
"Can it
never
wait?"
small.
"No."
I was.
There was something in her voice that made him pause. "Do you still love me, Ethan?"
Didn't know who
He
you were.
hesitated, and in that hesitation, Clara felt something break inside her. "I don't know what that even means anymore," he finally replied. "I need more from life than this." He gestured vaguely at the small apartment, at her quiet presence. She nodded slowly. "I see." He didn't notice how carefully she folded her hands to keep them from shaking. Days later, Lydia told him her father was considering investing in a private legal fund. "If you were single," she said lightly, "you'd be a perfect fit. No complications."
If I go back
The
to
word
him,
lodged itself in his mind like a
I lose
splinter.
myself.
Complications. That night, he printed the divorce papers. When he slid them across the table a week later, he did it with a smile that was meant to be merciful but felt cruel. "You deserve someone who fits your small, cozy world," he told Clara, "and I deserve more." She looked at the papers, then at him. For a moment, he thought she might beg. Instead, she picked up the pen. "If this is what you want," she said softly, "then sign." As Ethan scribbled his name, he felt oddly triumphant, unaware that he was signing away far more than a marriage. Clara's signature was steady. Inside, she was already stepping into a different life, one he would soon realize he never truly knew. The rain began to fall just as Ethan Blake walked out of the Brooklyn apartment for what he believed was the last time. It was a thin, irritating drizzle, the kind that soaked into a suit without making much noise, and it suited his mood perfectly. He felt oddly light, as if a weight he had been carrying for years had finally been set down. In his mind, Clara was already becoming a memory, a quiet chapter of his life that no longer fit the man he was determined to become. Inside the apartment, Clara stood by the window, watching his figure disappear into the gray blur of the street. She did not run after him. She did not call his name. Instead, she reached for her phone and sent a single message to a number that had not been used in 3 years. "It's done." The reply came almost immediately. "We're ready whenever you are, Ms. Whitmore."
Not every love is.
The next morning, Manhattan woke up to a shock that rippled through the financial world like an earthquake. Every major news outlet carried the same headline. Clara Whitmore confirmed as sole heiress to the Whitmore Group, a shadow empire worth over $1 trillion. Hidden trusts, offshore accounts, and investment vehicles that had quietly shaped global markets for decades were suddenly linked to a woman most of the world had never heard of.
This is what you
Photos of
chose to
Clara
throw
began to
away.
circulate, pulled from obscure publishing websites and old college records. The image of a soft-spoken book editor in Brooklyn didn't match the scale of the fortune she now controlled, and that contradiction only made the story more irresistible. Ethan was in a conference room at Lydia Carrington's firm when his phone started vibrating nonstop. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was another client, but then Lydia glanced at her own screen, her face draining of color. "Ethan," she whispered, "isn't your ex-wife named Clara?" His stomach tightened. "What?" She turned her phone toward him. There, staring back at him, was Clara's face beneath a headline that made his chest feel hollow. He read it once, then again. The room seemed to tilt. $1 trillion. The words didn't even feel real. His mind raced back through every moment of their marriage. Every casual dismissal, every joke he had made about her modest job, her lack of ambition, her quiet life. He remembered sliding the divorce papers toward her with that faintly amused smile. You deserve someone who fits your small, cozy world. The memory burned. Lydia slowly pulled her hand away from his. You told me she was nobody, she said, her voice tight. I didn't know, Ethan replied, though even to his own ears it sounded like a lie. Of course he hadn't known. That was the cruelest part. Clara had never needed him, never needed his career or his connections. She had chosen him, and he had thrown her away because he thought she was small. Within hours, reporters were camped outside the Brooklyn building where Clara had lived. Cameras flashed as she stepped out, her posture calm, her eyes unreadable. She gave no interviews, no statements. Behind the scenes, however, the machinery of the Whitmore Group began to move with quiet efficiency. Lawyers, advisors, and executives who had been waiting in the shadows for years now came forward, pledging loyalty to the rightful heir. Clara moved into a discreet penthouse overlooking Central Park, not because she craved luxury, but because anonymity was no longer possible. That night, Ethan stood alone in his sleek Manhattan apartment, the silence pressing in on him. Lydia had already stopped answering his calls. Her family's connections were too valuable to risk on a scandal that painted her as the other woman to a newly revealed financial titan. He poured himself a drink he didn't want and stared at his phone, at Clara's number. For the first time in years, he felt small. He typed, deleted, then typed again. Clara, I just saw the news. We need to talk. The message went unread. In her penthouse, Clara sat at a long glass table with her legal team. They spoke in careful, respectful tones, outlining assets, strategies, public statements. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment Ethan had signed those papers, the faint smirk he hadn't even realized he was wearing. He had mocked her without knowing it. Now the world knew what he had lost. And for the first time since the divorce, Clara allowed herself to feel something sharp and dangerous stirring beneath her calm. Not revenge, not yet. Something deeper. Something that would force them both to finally face the truth of what they had done to each other. The city that had always made Ethan Blake feel powerful now felt hostile, as if every glass tower and digital billboard were silently accusing him. Clara Whitmore's name was everywhere. Financial channels dissected her father's legacy. Late-night hosts joked about the quiet book editor who secretly owned more wealth than entire nations. And social media turned her into a myth before she had said a single public word. Ethan sat in his office at the law firm, staring at a muted television where analysts argued over what kind of leader Clara would become. Every sentence felt like a blow. He remembered how she used to sit at their kitchen table, reading manuscripts with a cup of cheap coffee, apologizing when she bought anything that wasn't on sale. The memory was unbearable now. His colleagues whispered when he walked past. Someone had already leaked that he was her ex-husband. A partner pulled him aside with a look that mixed curiosity and pity. You were married to her? Ethan nodded, feeling his throat tighten. You must have been very close. Close. The word was cruel in its understatement. Meanwhile, Clara moved through a different kind of storm. The Whitmore Group's headquarters, hidden for decades behind layers of shell companies, opened its doors to her. The building itself was understated, a monolith of glass and steel that blended into Midtown's skyline. But inside it hummed with restrained power. Executives who had once served her father now bowed their heads in quiet respect. Clara listened more than she spoke, absorbing the scope of what she now commanded. Yet even surrounded by wealth and influence, she felt a hollow ache where her marriage had been. In the evenings, she found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone, pictures of Ethan laughing in their tiny kitchen, of them walking hand in hand through Central Park before ambition had poisoned everything. The difference was that now she understood something she hadn't before. He had never loved her. He had loved what he thought she could become for him. When Ethan finally managed to get through to her assistant, he begged for a meeting. Just 5 minutes, he said, his voice breaking in a way it never had before. I need to explain. Clara considered the request with the same careful detachment she now applied to billion-dollar decisions. After a long pause, she agreed. They met in a private lounge high above the city, where floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan stretched out like a glittering map. Ethan arrived early, pacing like a man waiting for a verdict. When Clara entered, he barely recognized her. She wore a simple black dress, but the way she carried herself was different, as if the world had finally caught up to who she truly was. "Clara," he said, standing too quickly. She nodded politely. "Ethan." They sat across from each other, the distance between them charged with everything they had left unsaid. "I didn't know," he began, the words tumbling out. "If I had known who you were, what you had, I never would have—" He stopped, realizing too late how that sounded. Her eyes flickered with something that might have been pain. "You never would have what?" she asked quietly. "Left me?" He swallowed. "Hurt you?" "You're saying you would have stayed if you knew I was rich," she replied. "That's not the same as loving me." Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. "I made a mistake," Ethan whispered. "The biggest of my life." Clara studied his face, seeing not the man she had married, but the man he had always been, stripped of pretense. "You didn't make a mistake," she said.
"You were never small."
"You made a choice."
I was.
Outside, the city glowed, indifferent to their private tragedy.
Didn't know
For
who you
Ethan, the realization was crushing. For Clara, it was strangely liberating. The world had turned upside down, but in the wreckage, she was finally beginning to see herself clearly. And for the first time, she wasn't sure there was any room left in her new life for the man who had failed to recognize her when it mattered most. Ethan Blake left the private lounge feeling as though he had been hollowed out from the inside. The city noise flooded back into his ears as soon as the elevator doors opened. But it all sounded distant, muffled, as if he were moving through water.
If I go back to him,
Clara's words echoed in his head with merciless clarity. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice." He had always prided himself on being rational, on weighing outcomes and risks. Yet for the first time, he was forced to confront a truth that no amount of legal reasoning could soften. He had chosen ambition over a woman who had loved him when he had nothing. And now that she had everything, he had lost even the right to stand beside her. Lydia Carrington was no longer answering his calls, but that hardly mattered anymore. The fantasy she represented had shattered the moment Clara's name had appeared across every financial network. Lydia had wanted power by association, and now the only association Ethan carried was that of a man who had discarded a queen without knowing it. Back in his apartment, he opened a drawer and found Clara's old journal by accident, something she had forgotten when she moved out. He hesitated before flipping it open, then stopped himself. Even now, there were boundaries he had already crossed too many times. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed they had once shared and buried his face in his hands. Across the city, Clara was attending her first official Whitmore Group board meeting. The long table gleamed under soft lighting, and every face turned toward her with expectation. She spoke calmly, outlining her vision for ethical investments, for a quieter kind of influence that didn't exploit but stabilized. Some executives were surprised by her restraint, but most were intrigued. Power did not need to be loud, she seemed to say. When the meeting ended, she returned to her penthouse alone. The silence there was different from the quiet of her old Brooklyn apartment. This silence was vast, filled with possibility, but also with a sense of being untethered. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the lights of Manhattan flicker like distant stars. Ethan's face intruded on her thoughts, not as he was now, desperate and small, but as he had been when they first fell in love. There was a version of him that had been kind, curious, almost gentle. She wondered when that man had disappeared. Days passed. Ethan sent messages he never would have dared send before. Apologies, memories, promises. Clara read them but did not reply. Each word felt like a ghost, reminding her of a past she could no longer step back into. Then one evening, she finally answered. Not with forgiveness, but with an invitation. They met again. This time not in a corporate lounge, but in Central Park, where they had once walked for hours talking about nothing and everything. Autumn had painted the trees in golden red, and the air smelled faintly of leaves and rain. Ethan looked thinner, his usual confidence eroded by regret. "I keep thinking about who we were," he said as they sat on a bench. "I keep wondering if there's any way to find that again." Clara watched a pair of children chasing pigeons across the grass. "That version of us existed because neither of us knew the truth," she replied. "You didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who you were." He flinched. I was afraid, he admitted, afraid of being insignificant. You were the one thing that didn't demand I prove myself, and somehow that made me resent you. She turned to him then, her gaze steady. Love isn't supposed to be a competition, she said. If you need someone to make you feel powerful, you don't love them. You use them. Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time she saw how deeply he understood what he had lost. But understanding came too late. Clara stood, the decision already forming in her heart. I didn't come here to punish you, she said softly. I came to let go. As she walked away, Ethan realized that regret had a voice, and it was calling his name in a city that no longer felt like home. The days after their meeting in Central Park unfolded with a strange, aching quiet for Ethan Blake. He returned to his routines out of habit more than purpose, walking into his law firm each morning as if his life had not been irrevocably altered. But everything felt different. Every document he signed, every contract he reviewed, seemed trivial compared to the truth that pressed against his chest. He had walked away from the one person who had ever loved him without calculation. His colleagues no longer treated him the same. Some were awkwardly polite, others openly curious, as if he had become a living, cautionary tale. The man who divorced a trillionaire without knowing it. The humiliation burned, but it was nothing compared to the deeper pain of knowing that Clara had been right. He had not made a mistake. He had made a choice, and now he was living inside its consequences. Clara, meanwhile, was learning what it meant to be powerful in a way that could not be hidden. Invitations poured in from political figures, philanthropists, and media empires. She declined most of them. Instead, she spent her time restructuring the Whitmore Group, ensuring that its vast wealth was no longer funneled through shadowy deals, but invested in long-term projects that aligned with her values. Yet even as she took command of her inheritance, part of her still mourned the simple life she had lost. The mornings in Brooklyn when love had felt uncomplicated. One evening, she found herself standing in front of the old apartment building, looking up at the windows that no longer belonged to her. Memories pressed in from every side. It was there that Ethan had first kissed her in the hallway because he couldn't wait to get inside. It was there that she had believed in him more than he ever believed in himself. The realization hurt, but it also clarified something she had been avoiding. She could never go back. Not to that place, not to that version of herself. Ethan tried one last time to reach her, not with grand declarations, but with honesty. I don't expect you to forgive me, he wrote. I just need you to know that I see now how deeply I failed you. Clara read the message slowly. For a long moment, she considered not replying at all. Then she typed a single sentence. Seeing it now doesn't change what happened then. The words were not cruel, just true. They were the final thread being cut. A week later, they encountered each other by chance at a charity gala hosted by the Whitmore Group. The room glittered with wealth and influence, but between them there was only an awkward stillness. Ethan watched as Clara moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, her presence commanding respect without demanding it. He realized that she no longer needed him to define her story. She had become something he could never be part of again. When their eyes met, there was no anger in hers, only a calm acceptance that somehow hurt more than any accusation. For Clara, that moment was the true ending of their marriage. Not the signing of the papers, not the shocking headlines, but the realization that she had finally outgrown the man she once thought was her future. Power had given her many things, but the greatest was clarity, and with it came the freedom to choose herself. As the gala continued around them, both Clara and Ethan understood that some stories cannot be rewritten, no matter how much you wish for a different ending. Time, which had once felt like an enemy to Clara Whitmore, began to move in a different way. Weeks passed, then months, and the initial storm of publicity slowly gave way to a quieter, more controlled narrative. The Whitmore Group was no longer just a shocking headline, but a living, breathing institution under her leadership. Clara found herself in boardrooms, in private meetings with global investors, and in long phone calls with advisors who respected her, not because of her inheritance, but because of her calm intelligence. Yet no matter how full her days became, there were still moments when she felt the echo of a life she no longer lived. Late at night, In the soft stillness of her penthouse, she sometimes reached for her phone out of habit, almost expecting to see a message from Ethan, then caught herself and set it down again. It was a small grief, but it was persistent. Ethan Blake, on the other hand, was unraveling in quieter, more invisible ways. Without Lydia Carrington and without the illusion of a glamorous future, his ambitions felt hollow. His work no longer gave him the same thrill. Every success was shadowed by the knowledge that he had once had something infinitely more valuable and had thrown it away. He began to avoid social gatherings, afraid of the unspoken judgment in people's eyes. Friends who had once admired his drive now seemed to pity him. One afternoon, he found himself standing outside the Whitmore Group building, unsure of what he was hoping to achieve. He didn't go inside. Just being that close to Clara's world made his chest tighten. Instead, he walked through the city, letting the familiar streets remind him of the man he used to be before ambition had consumed everything. Clara learned of his struggles not from him, but from quiet whispers that reached her through mutual acquaintances. She felt a complicated mix of sadness and detachment. She didn't want him to suffer, but she also knew that his pain was the natural consequence of his choices. To interfere would be to deny both of them the truth. One evening, she attended a small literary event, a reminder of the life she had once loved. There, she met people who had never heard of the Whitmore fortune and who spoke to her only as Clara, the editor who loved stories. For a few hours, she felt lighter. She realized then that her future did not have to be defined by either her wealth or her past marriage. It could be something entirely her own. Ethan, meanwhile, finally understood what it meant to be alone. In the quiet of his apartment, he confronted the version of himself he had avoided for so long. He wrote Clara a final letter, not to ask for forgiveness, but to acknowledge the depth of his regret. He never sent it. Some words were meant only for the person who wrote them. When Clara stood once more by the window of her penthouse, looking out over the city, she felt the weight of what was lost, but also the promise of what could still be found. Love had not disappeared from her life. It had simply changed shape, and for the first time, she was ready to let something new begin. The first snow of winter fell quietly over New York, softening the sharp edges of the city and turning even the most crowded streets into something almost gentle. Clara Whitmore watched the white flakes drift past the tall windows of her penthouse, feeling a calm she had not known for a long time. The Whitmore Group was stable under her leadership now, its influence carefully guided rather than recklessly wielded. For the first time since her father's death and her marriage's collapse, her life no longer felt like a series of reactions to other people's choices. It felt like something she was finally shaping for herself. Ethan Blake, in a much smaller apartment across town, sat by his own window and watched the same snowfall. He had downsized not only out of financial necessity, but out of a need to simplify, to strip his life back to something honest. The silence no longer terrified him. It was a reminder of what he had lost and of the man he was trying, slowly, painfully, to become. He still thought of Clara every day, not as the powerful heiress the world now knew, but as the woman who used to fall asleep beside him while reading, her face soft in the lamplight. That memory was his quiet punishment and his only comfort. Clara and Ethan would never be together again. Both of them understood that now in a way that required no more painful conversations. The love they had shared had been real, but it had been built on misunderstandings and unspoken truths. Once those were gone, what remained was not enough to sustain a future. Clara had learned that love without respect is just another form of loneliness, and Ethan had learned that ambition without integrity leaves nothing worth having. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to invest not just in markets, but in people. She funded literacy programs, small publishers, and independent voices that reminded her of why she had once loved her quiet life. She attended book readings and charity events where no one cared about her wealth, only about the ideas she supported. Slowly, she began to feel whole again. Ethan, too, found a strange kind of peace in his humility. He took on cases that paid less but mattered more, helping people who reminded him of where he came from. He no longer chased the approval of those who measured worth in money and status. The loss of Clara had taught him, too late, what truly mattered. One evening, months later, Clara and Ethan crossed paths one final time on a quiet street near a small theater. There was no drama, no confrontation. They exchanged a brief, understanding look, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had been to each other and everything they could never be again. Then they walked in opposite directions, carrying their separate futures with them. The city continued to glow around them, indifferent yet somehow forgiving. In a world obsessed with wealth and power, Clara Whitmore had chosen self-respect, and Ethan Blake had been left with the weight of his own choices. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was something far more honest.